Hey, hey, welcome back to Gather, Connect, Create. I'm your host, Megan Schultz, and this is the podcast where week after week, I hope to share tiny nuggets of inspiration, ideas, conversations, ways that you might be able to gather, connect, and create in your own community. I think that's what this world needs more of, and I just want to put this into the world to help be a small part of making that happen. Welcome to the podcast. I feel like there may be some new listeners here, listeners who are fans of today's guest, Garrett Bucks. Garrett is a writer and a bridge builder and somebody who has spent a lot of time asking, what does it take for people to be in relationship with each other across difference? He writes a lot about this on his Substack, The White Pages. He wrote about it in a book that you can find wherever you get your books, called The Right Kind of White. And what I love most about getting his weekly emails and following him as a sort of public figure in this sphere is that he really brings it back to tangible ideas, things that we can do with each other, shoulder to shoulder, chair to chair, day after day, week after week, in community together, right? Where we stay together and work together through our differences, through our difficulties to build community. I also know him because he's a soccer dad and we're friends through our kids and their sporty connections. And so I can vouch that he is just an all-around nice guy as well. So I'm excited to bring him onto the podcast today because I think he exemplifies what I'm trying to do with Gather, Connect, Create. If you are new here and you would like to stay in touch, I have a newsletter. You can hop over to gatherconnectcreate.com. It'll take you to my website. And if you scroll down, you can get on the newsletter. And I only send it out once a week when I'm in season. I don't know how to spam. I'm not that technologically savvy, so I wouldn't know what to do, even if I did want to, which I don't. And I would love to welcome you into this community as well. And I'd love to hear what you're doing in your community to gather, connect, and create. All right. I'm going to jump right into this interview with Garrett Bucks. Garrett Bucks, welcome to Gather, Connect, Create. I'm so excited to have you here. And we got to know each other a little more recently in person because our daughters play soccer together. So
in the 50 different combinations of temperature and precipitation one can have in a Milwaukee fall and spring. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So we've gotten to know each other a little bit on the sidelines, but I feel like I've been following your professional work for a few years now. And I mentioned in the introduction that a little bit about who you are, but you're a community organizer, an activist, a trainer of activists and organizers, a writer, a Substacker, a podcaster yourself. You wrote a book, an excellent book, I might add, called The Right Kind of White, and a gatherer yourself. And so I feel like, having read your Substacks and been following along, I feel like it's fair to say that you are someone who believes wholeheartedly in the idea that belonging is where it's at. Right? That loving our neighbors isn't just this do good, feel good, passive idea, but it's like an active, sometimes hard, often uncomfortable thing that commitment that we have to make to each other, right? On the daily, even if we don't agree with our neighbor or even if our neighbor, I would have to bleep the word out, right? Excuse my French, but did I sum that up? Is there a better, you got a better 30-second elevator pitch for yourself there?
That was awfully good. Yeah, that was great. No, I should have you do my elevator pitch because mine ends up being a very long elevator ride. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a lot of people talking about community and gathering right now, and I'm glad about it. What I would add to the conversation is that I do think that turning towards each other is really, really important for loneliness. It is really, really important for the isolation we feel. It is really, really important for, all of the immediate tangible benefits we receive from it. And I would also add that it is, pick your crisis you would like us to be delivered from or to deliver ourselves from. If that is authoritarianism, that is the way tech has taken over our lives, if that is an economy that kind of constantly feels really precarious for so many, that we're not getting out of it. And historically, human beings have never gotten out of it, out of the worst moments in human history without starting with each other and caring as much about what you are building with a set of neighbors that you actually know as you care about how you are voting, as you care about kind of a macro political problem, as you care about how you're spending your money, all of those things. So
Yeah.
nailed it. 100%. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I so agree. That whole idea of being in community, knowing our neighbors. I mean, and as I was trying to think of a direction for this podcast, because there are so many things that we could talk about in terms of the work that you're doing to engage community and bring people together in this city, but also nationally, and I think internationally too. Maybe you
Yeah.
had some people in your barn raisers. So there's so many different directions we could go in. But the one that hit me was when you sent out an email about a month ago, maybe at this point, about a brand new project that you're initiating called the Declaration of No, let me say this again.
So hard to say.
Yeah, the Declaration of Interdependence Relay, because
That's
we're
right.
coming up on our 250th anniversary, right? And that to me was like, okay, this is a no-brainer. This is what we're going to talk about for this episode. We're going to come back to maybe in part 2 and 3 about some of the other things that you do and that people can get involved with. But I just thought this concept was so cool because it encapsulates what you were just saying about all those the things that you believe, right? So as this podcast is now called Gather, Connect, Create, it just seemed obvious. So
good work.
can you tell us about this project? What is the Declaration of Interdependence Relay?
You nailed it. So, well, first off, it's something that I often call the relay because, and just the relay, because as you notice, I love how evocative the name is, and how much of a kind of curious, it invites a curiosity, but I do not like how many syllables are in it. And so, yes, the Interdependence Relay, the Declarations of Interdependence Relay, or as most days, just the relay. So here's the big idea of it, right? You are correct. 250 years ago, folks signed the Declaration of Independence. And this year, there's going to be all sorts of big and small commemorations of that, right? And big, which is essentially saying there's going to be big and small tellings of the American story. And every time somebody does that, right, every time we have a birthday or a celebration, even on a small scale, but definitely when we have something like that, we are not telling an unbiased story. We're not telling a story towards, just without some sort of end in mind, right? And so I'm sure there's going to be some tellings of this American story that I resonate with, that other folks are doing. There's going to be a whole lot of them that don't resonate with me. I think there's going to be a whole lot of official ones from the current United States administration that do not resonate with me. But if I think about, my understanding of the American story, and both what saddens me the most about it and what gives me the most hope, is I understand why a Declaration of Independence is right when what you're trying to do is become a new country separate from another. But I think that beyond that, every time we as people in America have pretended we are independent of each other, I think that's when we've gone wrong. That if we, from the very start, right, that declaration was one that said, yes, we're independent from Britain, but there's only some of us who are in that we. Right? There is a set of white men with property who are in that we, and there's others who are not, right? We are independent of each other, right? And throughout the country, whenever there has been that kind of cleaving of responsibility for being each other's caretaker, that's when the biggest mistakes of America have happened, right? Yeah. And then on the contrary, if I look at the American stories that buoy me and inspire me the most, it is always stories of intense interdependence, right? And a lot of those, as somebody who's an activist and organizer, are activist stories, right? The Underground Railroad is a story of knitting together a physical transportation route that was also a care route, that was also a resistance route to of domination, right? That the civil rights movement was both a calling spiritually to saying we're not going to be a country until we are a country where everyone belongs. But so many of the actions of that movement also required essentially just local care work, right? The Montgomery bus boycott was, once again, largely a project of figuring out different ways to get people to work if they were not going to be on the bus. It was figuring out different ways to feed each other if they were now doing a really big, busy project and didn't have the normal time. It was different ways to pay for each other if people's job prospects were up in the air, right? It was a community saying that to do something transformative as activists, we need to take care of each other, right? And so then when I move away from even just activist stories like that towards other stories that seem to strike me to the best of us, right? How a community responds after a flood or a hurricane, how, my organizing vessel that I train folks through is called the Barn Raisers Project. And that too is a deliberate nod to, there was a time when in small towns and rural communities, when somebody needed a barn, the community came together and did it for them. I think those are all the best versions of an American story. And those are the best, those have never not been the kind of stories that we need to rely on. But I think that now more than ever, this is a moment where very, very powerful forces, politically and economically, are telling us that we don't owe each other as an entire American polity anything, right? That we can be divided politically, that political movements can reign supreme, that say many of us don't belong, and that economically, we don't rely on each other anymore, that our solution is going to be an app or an AI or something that is quote unquote contactless, that does not require the messiness of human experience. And no wonder you hear, like the previous Surgeon General, Viv F. Murphy, talk about a pandemic of loneliness, essentially, right? No wonder, right? Everything is made as such. So in the midst of that, my organizing work over the years has gotten, as you noted, has given me this incredible opportunity to be introduced to people who are trying to be gatherers, right? Who are trying to be community builders in a wide variety of different places. Folks who say, folks like Danielle in Iowa City, who was hit the age as a woman where your doctor tells you, and this is her own words, where your doctor tells you that you have to start weight training. And she's like, darn it, I don't want to. I would rather do it in community. I'm also living in Iowa. I feel really, really restricted by a lot of moves my government's making. So I want to pull together a group of perimenopausal women in Iowa who want to lift weights together and who want to fundraise for things like abortion funds and go knock on doors to kind of to kick out our pretty unresponsive congressional representative. I get to connect with folks like that, right? I get to connect with folks in Jackson, Mississippi, who are running really, really inspiring workforce development programs for youth who are, quite frankly, the kind of kids, young Black men who've struggled in school, who potentially got involved in the criminal justice system, et cetera, who a lot of folks in that community have always said are the ones that don't belong, right? And so I get to hear about all of these examples, like a Shabbat potluck dinner series in Austin, Texas, right? A regenerative garden group in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a sprawling network of neighborhood gatherers in Nashua, New Hampshire. I get to hear about all of these things. And over the course of the many years, because of trainings I've done, I get to be connected in a kind of a hub and spoke model with some of the folks who've done this. And my job has generally just been to be this incredible cheerleader, to say, yes, what you're doing is absolutely right. Anything I can do to help, this is wonderful. And from getting to know these folks, I know that two things are true at once for all these folks. One, I think that they do trust on pretty instinctually, for the same reason that I'm passionate about this work, namely that I tried everything else but turning towards other people, and it left me pretty lonely and miserable. I think they understand instinctually it's the right thing. They are getting a certain amount of energy from building things with their neighbors. And building things with your neighbors is really, really tiring. You have to deal with people flaking, with getting frustrated that you have to keep on doing the invitation and people aren't doing the invitation back. You have to deal with interpersonal conflicts. And then you have to wake up and still hear what's on the news and say, yes, I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but it still doesn't feel like enough. And it still feels like I'm a lonely little gatherer in the midst of a kind of macro forces of isolation and alienation from each other. And so the relay, the big idea of it is if it's the 250th anniversary of this country, that I want to celebrate interdependence rather than independence. I want to celebrate in particular the people who are doing that work across the entire country. And hopefully I want to tell the story both to those folks and to all of us that there is actually something brewing here, that the neighbors trading text messages, making sure that they all have each other's number on a block in San Diego, are connected to the same set of neighbors doing so on a rural lane in Maine, who are now getting together every Friday on their rural street. And I want those folks to feel like they're actually part of something bigger than themselves. So the idea practically is we are starting next month, which terrifies me, in Alaska and Hawaii, which was a smart idea for lots of storytelling reasons, but a terrible idea from the standpoint of that is where my network is thinnest. So I am currently spending all my time. Well, the good news is I'm learning very quickly some of the coolest work people are doing in Alaska and Hawaii, which is just selfishly a wonderful part of this. But we're going to start in Alaska and Hawaii. And then eventually, over the course of an entire 12 months. So we'll not finish by the end of this calendar year. Over the course of 12 months, we're going to weave up and down all 50 states and eventually hitting the 50th state in Maine, and then probably having a big celebration in Washington, D.C. afterwards. And there's going to be, and the actual thing that's going to travel, as much as I would love to travel to each and every one of these events, as you note, I am a father here in Milwaukee. I like being a father here in Milwaukee, and I enjoy my family, and soccer and robotics practice deliveries are not going to happen by themselves. So I am not, except with a very few small number of exceptions, I'm not the thing that's traveling. Nor am I the important part of this. I'm just the connector. What's going to be traveling is I've got this big box, a big, beautiful wooden box. I sound like Trump, a big, beautiful wooden box, a big, beautiful wooden box with 50 compartments inside. That's going to start out empty. Every gathering, and there's going to be a wide variety of gatherings. Some are going to be in classrooms, some are going to be in churches or synagogues or mosques. Some are going to be outside at block parties. Some are going to be very, very small living room gatherings. Some of them are going to be, I already know, groups of 500 or more that come together regularly. Some will be relatively nascent convenings. Some will be things that have been long established for decades. We're going to have a large variety of gatherings. And I want each gathering to be them, to just do whatever they do. If you are a 11th grade history class, be an 11th grade history class. If you are doing this after church on Sunday, do whatever you need to do as a church. My only request is at some point you have some sort of conversation about, what is our declaration or commitment? What is our pledge to not just twofold, to each other as neighbors? Who are we going to try to be in this next year, in this next 10 years, in these next 250 years? Who are we going to try to be to each other? And what about us has some sort of beautiful offering to make to the country as a whole? What's our commitment to each other? What's our commitment to a nation of gatherers? And I want folks to not overthink it, but put that in some variety of words such that I can share that, in all sorts of formats with all sorts of folks. And then I want them to physically pick something and put it in the box. Each compartment is going to be roughly the size of a small coffee cup. So big enough to have some creativity to it, but not big enough that you can put a truck in there. So, but fill the box, fill your compartment, and then pass it on. And so the box is going to travel relay style across all 50 gatherings, across all 50 states. Folks can then follow that on our website, jointherelay.org. Also on my social media, in particular my Instagram right now, Garrett Bucks on Instagram. So you can see and celebrate each gathering as it travels across the country. You can hear the commitments. Those gatherers will then be connected with each other as well. We'll have a kind of internal online network where we are celebrating and learning from each other. And that's what we've got figured out. Everything else, what do we learn from this? Where do we mess it up? What ends up being the secret sauce for a really, really beautiful gathering? Who ends up meeting each other through this that ends up being a really wonderful connection? Who participates in this and never thinks about it again? We're going to discover all of that as we go along. The box, I think, is kind of the metaphor here. We have the physical container figured out, but it is empty. And I think we're going to be in a different place with this project and what we've learned from it when it's full.
Yeah, we'll have to come back in a year to see
Yeah.
what happens. I love the idea of these small, potentially small, I know that can be any size, but small gatherings around the country knowing that they're in this same mission. I feel like after 2016 there was a big huge, like, we saw the women's march, we saw
Sure.
everybody wanting to get out big style to connect and gather. And I feel like in this last election, we all were just maybe feeling a little exhaustion from that and then gathering smaller and
I think that's true.
gathering in small, like one of the Lizzie, who was on the podcast back in November. We have a protest potluck, right? And
Yeah.
it's just like 8 people. We're just like
I love
talking
it.
about what the heck is happening here, what's going on. It's a time to just
Mhm.
spitball how we're feeling. And I feel like I'm seeing a lot of people doing that. Not that they don't want to connect eventually, and not that they're not calling senators and going to the marches and joining up with the bigger forces, but it feels like we're in this space right now in this country where we want this kind of smaller yet connected. So I love this idea that you have a way to connect the small things that are happening, because I think that inspires other small things to happen.
What meaning do you make? I think that you really nailed it in terms of that, call it vibes shift or whatever, between what people were led to do in 2016 versus 2024. What
Mm.
what meaning do you make of why that was?
I feel like maybe it was, I mean, the exhaustion of putting so much work into it the first time and not really seeing anything change,
Sure.
and just that frustration of, oh, well, screw it. If it doesn't make a difference. So
Mm,
realizing that actually where I can make a difference is in my sphere right here.
mm,
That is where I can spread some joy or bring some hope, or,
mm,
actually get my hands dirty and do something. Again, not like calling your senators and get your hands dirty. I mean, that all that stuff needs to get done, but like I can spend my Tuesday afternoons going down to Kinship Community Food Center
that's right.
and distributing food, and that is, I'm doing something, like maybe it didn't feel like what they were doing was making any difference. I don't know. I don't know if that's just my thoughts on that vibe shift.
I think that's really really right. I think that it's the caution I give myself, because I think I have a very similar analysis, is to be kind to 2016 me, to be
Mm,
kind to 2020 me. I think that we have learned so much experientially as people who are dreaming of a kinder, more welcoming United States. I think we've learned so much from everything that we've tried. I think that, why would it feel like in 2016 that the way to, you know, oppose an administration that you didn't like, that oppose authoritarianism, et cetera, would we do something really, really large and really, really public in a classic media moment? Part of that was instinctually this, that's one way to feel less alone, right? But I
mm,
think that we also had just kind of been through, look at my kind of lifetime. I'm kind of on the older edge of being, the very oldest edge of being a millennial. I've grown up my entire lifetime with these kind of promises of pretty bold salvation, right? That if every election is the most important election of my lifetime, and the ones that we win are going to be just all we need, and the ones we lose are going to be, we're going to lose everything. And so these big kind of singular moments, you have to put everything just into that, right? Or I think a lot about the technological and economic promises that have been made, right? That, like, my everything about my life is going to be solved now that I have a phone, right? And
mm,
now that the phone does more, right? And so it was always a broad proclamation of kind of a revolutionary new development in our lives was going to save us. And so I think that triggers us that, well, okay, when we want to resist, that's what we do too. We go really, really big, and we need to find, if it was Steve Jobs who stood on a podium and promised us that technological advancement, if it was Obama who stood at a presidential convention, nominating convention, and promised us, political hope that now in this moment we need to have a really, really big march and we need to find the leaders, right?
Mm.
And that's going to be what saves us. No wonder. I get it. It makes
Yeah.
sense, right? And then I think we did that again, in particular with the racial justice protests of 2020.
Mm.
And I don't think that those things are failures necessarily. It's an incredible accomplishment to have people stop and do really big marches and do sustained protest energy. And I think that it gave people a lived experience like, oh, you can have all that. And the world can just go back to what it was afterwards. That it's that is a kind of singular shock. And darn it, now we have to now, what do we do about it?
Mm.
And I am still just as lonely as I was before. I am still just as isolated as I was before. So I often think about this kind of turn towards community as being very much a screw it, I've tried everything else kind of thing for folks. And I'm still, we're recording this in March of 2026, and so it's still very much in this era where the example for social change that is still on top of our mind is still what happened in Minneapolis in January and February, and the way neighbors showed up to each other. But it is really, really notable. I do this every kind of speech or speaking engagement I do right now, where I ask folks, think about that, what we just saw in Minneapolis. Tell me, please, who was the leader of that?
Mm.
And of course, there's nobody answer. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, as somebody who's trained and supported activists in Minneapolis, they will tell you the same thing.
Mm.
And that's what's really, really beautiful about that, is that they discovered in practice, when they had to do something really, really urgent and acute, the people who were most useful to them were not the people with the most experience on megaphones, were not the people with the largest number of social media followers, were not the people who would have been picked to be on like the speaker's order at a protest. It was the people. If the job was, oh shoot, we have to deliver groceries to neighbors who can't go to outside their home right now, we have to find out which churches are going to be able to be fiscal sponsors for fundraisers, we are going to need to vet people who are joining these signal groups and see if this is an actual neighbor or not. The people who were most useful were not the people with the biggest mouths. They were the people who knew the most neighbors already,
Right.
who already, to use yours as an example, that could know how to work with a Minneapolis version of kinship in that moment, because they had already been showing up every Tuesday, right? Could come with the 8 people that they'd been having potlucks with all the time to something, so they weren't just coming alone, and already that was kind of a network and a group that could then expand. Those 8 people then knew 64 people rather than just 8 people, right? Those were the people who were most useful. And so I think what we're, if the theory of change is that the way that you build a better world is by having a really, really big protest, people pay attention to you, and then it clicks, then we were doing the right thing, right? What we discovered was we're in a different place, where perhaps we're starting from we're in new terrain where we know that doesn't work, but we know that people need a lot of things around us. And so if that's the case, then I think we're realizing in practice, oh, this is both satisfying a need I have emotionally, and it does, like, it practically enables me to show up in a way that isn't just one and done.
Yeah. To bring it back to the relay, because obviously you want one gathering in each state. So there's going to be a lot of, I'm sure, applicants who don't get selected, right? Because you only have one. How are they following along? Or are you encouraging them to continue doing those gatherings? And for people who might be listening, who might not necessarily be interested in being a part of the relay, but love the idea of beginning their own gatherings and don't really know what is your advice for those folks?
Yeah. So great question. You're absolutely right. In a lot of states, we're going to have a lot of folks that we say no to, not because they don't have gatherings that we love, but we're just trying to pick a mix of sites, et cetera. And so, yes, we are going to offer everyone who is not selected to have the actual box come to you to still be part of our community, still be join our internal online community of gatherers, still get to be celebrated in different ways, and any support I can give you all, I would love to still give. So that is 100% still on the table. If you think that you are even just moderately interested, and or want to make sure that you get word of what gathering is coming by within an hour of you, then go to jointherelay.org. There's a very, very clear application process for folks who definitely want to be considered as a host, but there's also just a really simple interest list. So we can make sure that you stay up to date, right? That interest list will also make sure that you are kept abreast of just the Barn Raisers Project trainings, which is a set of free trainings I do on how to, if you've never gathered folks before, if you've never thought of yourself as an organizer or anything like that, how to start.
Yeah. Well, and here I'm just going to put on my hat here. Listeners, you can't see this, but I'm putting on a baseball hat, and on the top it says potlucks, which I got from Garrett by joining his Substack.
That's right.
White pages on Substack.
Yep.
And I want you to give a 30-second plug for potlucks because I love them. You love them. I feel like this is your jam.
Well, I want to hear why you love them too, but I love them. First off, yes, the whitepages.net, subscribe and become a paid subscriber to get a really, really classy looking hat that says potlucks on it, or or other fun merch. And also, I think some decent writing from me. But let's talk potlucks. What I love about potlucks is they are form and function. They are an actual gathering that you could plan tomorrow, that folks could be at this weekend, that we all kind of instinctivally know how to do, right? And so just practically making people feel like I don't know what to host or how to host, or I don't, feeding 20 people feels intimidating me. Don't feed 20 people. Make a dish that works for your family, and invite 20 people over, or invite 5 people over, and there will have exactly enough food for everybody. I love that about potlucks. We all know intuitively how to do it. I love that potlucks are form and function for the kind of communities that we're talking about building. We're saying care where everyone belongs. If we're talking about solidarity, what I love about potlucks is nobody is the charity case at a potluck. Nobody is the savior at a potluck. Everybody brings something, everybody eats. And I love that potlucks are also messy. You will have potlucks sometimes where yes, you can get more organized, and I love the better spreadsheet enablers of us, but you'll probably also have potlucks where everyone only brings desserts and you end up with a sugar high, but you remember that potluck, right? Yep. You end up bringing a potluck one time, and you have a host of potluck one time, and you realize you didn't talk to everyone about their allergies well enough, and that you have to scramble because somebody doesn't have enough food for their dietary needs. But you work then hard as a community to solve that. And then the next time we never thought, I have a potluck group right now where somebody has a rice allergy. I never knew of rice allergies. I thought rice was like the safe one that everyone could do, right? But now we know, right? So you end up becoming closer, both in the successes and the failures, and the commitment that however that went, we're going to try to do it again and a little bit better. And finally, you can't help at a potluck but hear somebody's story, right? That is a story of, I made my grandmother's favorite dish. That is a story of, I stopped and got fried chicken at Pick and Save on the way because that was all I had time for, because let me tell you about how busy my week has been. Both of those are great stories, and both those are stories that matter. So that's what I love about them. What do you like about potlucks?
Yeah, I mean, all same. The informality for sure. The favorite one that we do is sometimes, or the last couple of years, we've been having a just clean out your fridge from all the Christmas crap and bring
Love
it to
it.
our house and we'll just get rid of it. And then everybody, you get this rando collection of chips and yeah, desserts and cookies. But you know what? Everybody's cleaned their fridge for the new year. It's a
That's so rad.
great way
That's
to
so
start.
rad.
But you're right. You're right about the stories. And I will say too that sometimes as somebody who's attended different types of potlucks at different places, it can take one or two potlucks to feel like you belong. Maybe that first one
Mm,
is a little
yeah.
intimidating. Maybe the host
Mm,
doesn't necessarily go for this jugular right away, or you don't hear the stories right away. But then the next time, and it takes part of the potluck too, and being in community is that commitment to keep showing up.
that's right.
Maybe by the second or third time, you're old friends.
That's right. That's well put. Oh man, you get it.
We'll have to have a potluck together. Maybe
I,
let's do this soccer potluck.
I'm in. I'm all in. And you know what? I think our team will be too. I think that, yeah.
I think so. I think so. Okay, this is where we might have to make this a two-parter, but I just do want to say, because I don't know if you know this, but you're only the second man I have ever interviewed
I was wondering
on this
about that. Yeah.
podcast. Yeah.
I sense it hasn't been many.
No, the first was an exception I made back when it was Cream City Dreams, and I
Right.
was only interviewing women for a dear friend of mine, Michael, out in LA, but that was 2 summers ago. And so there's a conversation I would love to have with you about men and
Mm,
gathering and connecting and creating because that's what the podcast is now called, and I specifically rebranded and renamed it so that I could talk to people who live outside of Milwaukee and also who might
right.
possibly be men, right? And also I should say, when I was looking at the kinds of women that I liked to interview, it was women who were doing those kinds of things, who were building community and crossing bridges and making connections. And so I think I'm drawn to them, and it was sort of naturally women because I feel like that's oftentimes, I don't want to generalize, but
No,
oftentimes it is the
you're
women who are doing that work,
you're correct.
right?
Yep.
And
Oh
not to
no.
say men don't do it, and you're a case in point, but
There's it's this is not an accidental pattern that you are
mm,
noticing, right? That that we gender is a story of socialization, right? And gender is a story we all learn, and then that we both intentionally and unintentionally pass down. And one of the stories that even with feminist parents, right, really, really incredible feminist parents that I picked up and internalized as a guy is that the way that you do politics, social change, professional work, etc., is very much kind of individual hero's journey kind of thing, right?
mm,
That I focus on my career and providing for my family that way. And if I'm also a social justice person, I make sure it's a nonprofit career, but I still get to like head up for leadership positions where I've got a fancy title.
mm.
And in politics, when I do politics, it's about like having the right opinion and arguing that opinion and making sure that others know that they have the wrong opinions, right? Those are the kind of things that, not because anyone ever sat me down and was like, that's how you be a man caring about the world, Garrett, but like just that I picked up, right?
Mm,
Like, and also what I was not, the work that I was either explicitly or implicitly um, I'd say excused from doing or never asked to do, right? The That you had to ask the question of who was, you know, who who set up the chairs and who took them down after a meeting at church, who was going to raise their hands to be chaperones and do the PTA fundraiser at school, who was going to make sure that they collected all the names and numbers of people on the block, that all of that gets put in the bucket of care work in the same way that, attending to the family calendar and remembering that the toilet needs to be clean, stuff like that gets put into care work in households for women.
mm,
And that in professional settings, that the taking the meeting notes, paying attention to who just left the meeting in tears, that kind of thing also gets put to women in workplaces, and that men are just excused from, right? That you have this moment right now that is so it's like the answer is right there, where you have all of this talk about a male loneliness crisis, and all of these kind of gurus and grifters kind of speaking to young men and saying you'll be less lonely if you quote unquote are more of a man. And I would say in
Mm-hmm.
my own life, right, what has made me less lonely was remembering people's birthdays. What has made me less lonely was noticing that somebody in a conversation said that they were going to have a surgery in the next month, and then making a note of that and bringing a lasagna over, right? What made me
Mm-hmm.
and what has made me less lonely has been being curious about other people, had been offering the gathering. And I don't do those things because then I want transactionally people to care about me. But if I am thinking more about other people, I am already less lonely. That is the
Right.
definition of loneliness, right?
Right.
And so there is this crisis that people are talking about for men, and a really, really obvious solution that has nothing to do, like, I have not done any examination in the last 2 years about a positive masculinity or a different way to be a man. I don't even know. That just feels like it'd only be kind of a navel gazing kind of set of questions. What has made me less, what has made my personal male loneliness crisis less acute has been the things that societally we expect women but not men to do, to be neighbors, to be knitters together, to be gatherers. And so I have, the irony of my work right now is that I'm a guy doing this work. I will predict right now, if the demographics of people who do my barn raisers trainings, my coaching, et cetera, are true, I bet at least 85% of the gatherings that you end up seeing in the relay will be, the primary host of them will be women and trans folks. The cis men will be 85. I say cis men will be the hosts of 5 to 10% of them. Is my bet. And I don't think it's a mystery as to why. And I don't think it's a mystery. And I don't think that there's a grand mystery as to how men get out of it. I'd say, like, be aware of it, take the feedback. And here's the thing. Once I've noticed more, this question of like, oh, where have I not shown up? Where have I essentially implicitly or explicitly said care work was not mine, I get more and more feedback about other things that I did not notice, right? Yes, in my household, on the PTA, yes, on the soccer team, yes, like on all sorts of things, right? So
yeah. Well, let's maybe have a part 2 sometime later so that we can unpack how we can bring more men into the fold, into being the gatherers and the connectors and the creators, because I think you're right. It's going to take all of us.
Thanks for having me to be the second man on the podcast. I'm honored. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to put links to how people can follow you in the show notes and on your Substack and your book, link to your book, and how they can follow along with the relay and maybe even join a barn raisers. Do you have some cohorts coming up in the spring, or?
Sign the interest list, but I'm not doing cohorts in the short term because I'm so busy getting the relay set up.
Okay.
But
okay.
I will be offering them before you know it, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I may have to join one of those.
I'd love to.
For sure.
I'd love to have you.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for consistently reminding us to love our neighbors, the obvious, but let's love our neighbors. Let's take care of each other. And I feel like you give us tangible ways that we can take care of each other. So I appreciate that. I look forward to reading your Substacks when they come out, and I can't wait to see how the relay goes. I'm excited to follow along the progress. I'm not on the socials anymore, so I hope you'll keep them coming on the Substack or the
100%. Yes.
in the newsletter too.
Congrats on being off the socials. Yeah.
Whew, yeah. It was tough, but boy, does it feel good. It feels good. So
I bet.
Yes. Well, I'm raising my coffee cup to many joyful gatherings across the U.S. this year for this relay of interdependence.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This is fun.
Listeners, there are so many more angles we could have taken this conversation. Garrett wears so many hats in the community in terms of things that he organizes. We barely touched on the Barn Raisers Project, which are cohorts that he runs a couple times a year, I believe, and they offer people who wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as organizers ways to build community, ways to move their own social networks toward action, which again is also what we need right now. I definitely could have talked a lot more about the idea of bringing more men into this sphere of community work and community building and activism. Not that there aren't men there, of course. We also didn't talk about his own history and how he got into this work and how his first couple jobs as a teacher shifted his own perspective on the work that he does today and what it means to be in community. So I think this is ripe for a part 2 for sure. And I definitely want to bring him back next year to see how the relay went. I want to see what this box looks like once it's filled. I can't wait to see the little nuggets of inspiration that I can pull from some of these gatherings and perhaps share them with you, because no doubt across 50 states, there are going to be 50 interesting and unique and one-of-a-kind gatherings come from this relay. But I'm also interested in hearing about the ordinary and what people are doing in Montana versus Nebraska versus Alaska, because I think sometimes knowing that there are people, like we talked about in the beginning, people doing the same thing in very small and ordinary ways, just knowing that you're in that community is also a part of how we make bigger change here. Thank you to Garrett for coming on the podcast today. I will put all the ways to connect with Garrett in the show notes. If you're new, please do sign up for my newsletter. I would love to have you a part of this community. I'm not on socials. I don't know all the fancy ways of bringing people into this community other than to say sign up for my newsletter, and I promise I won't spam. I'll be back next week with another opportunity to hear a conversation or a story or an idea of ways that you can gather, connect, and create in your neck of the woods. See you next week.